Hi everyone, it's Mrs. Bebo. In this video, we're going to continue to look at equations that have variables on both sides. Just now we have ones that are a little bit more involved. So in this first example that you're seeing on the screen right now, we're going to solve equations that have grouping symbols and the variables on both sides. Again, if you have done all your practice leading up to this point, these really are not too bad. And I'm going to walk you through step by step what you need to do each time. So for the one on the left here, it says solve 7 multiplied by the quantity n minus 1 equals -2 multiplied by the quantity 3 plus n. So you might want to, especially when there's a lot going on, draw that line through your equal sign so you can just keep yourself organized as you go through these problems step by step. If you have parentheses going on, which we do in this case, right, these grouping symbols, the first step is to get rid of them. We need to apply the distributive property. So we're going to take that 7, we're going to multiply by n, and we're going to multiply by the 1. We're also going to be applying the distributive property on the right-hand side, and we're going to be doing -2 times 3, and then we're also going to do -2 times the n there. So now 7 times n, that is just going to be 7n. Minus 7 times 1, which is 7. I have my equal sign. -2 times 3 is -6. Bring down my plus sign. -2 times n is a -2n. So now at this point, again, we have choices. You can subtract the 7n. We could add the 7. We could add the 6 to both sides, or we could add 2n to both sides. I, again, advise that you start with one of those variable terms, so either taking away the 7n or adding the 2n. And I'm going to actually add the 2n to both sides because I know as a student, I always struggle with keeping track of my negative signs. And if I add 2n to both sides, that is going to make it so that I don't have a negative coefficient. So I'm going to add 2n to both sides, making sure that I line it up with that term that I'm going to be combining it with. I'm trying to keep myself organized. So 7n plus 2n, that is going to be 9n. Then we have a -7 still here, equals -6. And at this point, this is a two-step equation. So we're going to start off by adding 7 to both sides, so we can get closer to isolating that variable. 9n equals +1. And the last step is to divide both sides by 9. And we end up with n equals 1/9. All right, so now we're going to take a look at another one just so we can make sure we are getting the steps to this. Plus, this is going to have a little bit more going on here. So it says solve 7, and then in parentheses we have n minus 2 plus 8 outside of the parentheses equals 3, again in parentheses n minus 4, and then outside of the parentheses a -2. Just like the previous question, I would advise, especially when we have a lot going on, draw that line through your equal sign so you can really keep yourself organized as you move step by step through this problem. So the first step, get rid of those parentheses. We're going to distribute. So 7 times n, 7 times 2. We also need to apply the distributive property on the other side of this equation as well. So 7 times n is going to be 7n. Bring down my subtraction sign. 7 times 2 is 14. And we have that plus 8 that's still hanging out here. And then on the right-hand side, we'll have 3 times n, so it's going to be 3n, minus 3 times 4, which is 12. And then we have that -2 that's hanging out on the end there as well. Unlike the last problem, we need to actually do a little bit more before we start moving things from side to side. So I notice that I have like terms on each side of this equation, right? So if I'm looking at my like terms, we have these here that need to be combined, that -14 plus 8, and then we have a -12 minus 2. So after you distribute, if there are like terms, those need to be taken care of next. So we're going to go ahead and do that right now. So the 7n is still going to be hanging out. So that -14 plus 8 is going to give me a -6, which I could write as plus -6, or in this case, just -6. And then that equals, and then we have 3n still, and then that -12 minus 2 is going to put me at -24. Again, you could write it as plus -24, or in my case, I'm just going to write it as a -24. They both mean the same thing. Now at this point, we can go ahead and start moving stuff from side to side so that we can get that variable isolated. So I'm going to start with the 3n, but remember you have choices. You could really, technically, you could subtract the 7n to start. You could add 6 to start. I'm going to subtract 3n to start. You could also add 24 to start. It's totally up to you. If you do all your inverse operations correctly, you would end up still with the same answer. I like to start off with, again, one of the variable terms, preferably the one that's going to make it so that I don't have a negative coefficient, which isn't always a possibility, but I try to avoid those negative coefficients as much as possible. So I'm going to subtract 3n from both sides of my equation. And what happens is now we're going to have 4n minus 6 equals a negative 24. And then we're going to have a two-step equation here to solve. And so we're going to add 6 to both sides so we can get rid of that subtracting 6. We'll have 4n equals negative 24 plus 6 is going to put me at negative 18. And then our last step is to divide both sides by 4. And we're going to get n equals, this would be negative 9 over 2. So this is going to be a negative 4.5. Or you could write that as a decimal, right? You could put 4.5, 4 and 5/10. That would work as well. Grouping symbols just means we're going to have to do distributive property. And then in some cases, we might have to combine like terms like we did on this example here. But after you've done that, then it just goes back to what we did in the previous video. All right, we're going to take a look now at some examples that have that fraction bar going on. And so we still have, again, the variable on each side of our equation, but now we have a giant fraction bar here. So with this question, it says solve 5y equals, and then it's this group 12y plus 16, all divided by 4. We just need to get rid of that dividing by 4. So just like we saw in another video, or if you haven't watched that one yet, that's okay. But this one, you're going to go through and just multiply by 4. Technically, we're multiplying by 4 over 1, right? So that this would cross cancel, and then you're left with just 12y over 16, 12y plus 16 over 1, which is just the 12y plus 16. You don't have to necessarily write that you're multiplying by 4 over 1, but that is technically the math behind it. And so that cancels out, and we're going to make sure we do the same thing, right, on the other side of my equation. So both sides we're multiplying by 4. So what happens is we end up with 20y equals 12y plus 16. So I'm going to get rid of this 12y because over here, these y's are already by themselves. So we're going to take away this 12y. And once we do that, we'll have 8y on the left-hand side equals, and this will be 16. And then the last step to get y by itself is to divide by 8 because, again, I want to know what 1y is equal to. And so we get y is equal to 2. Okay? So let's take a look at another one with the giant fraction bar. So this one says solve, and then 6x minus 9, that whole group is being divided by 5, and that equals 3x. So before we can do anything, we have to get rid of this giant fraction bar. So to do that, we're going to multiply both sides by 5. So again, I'm going to write multiplying by 5 on both sides. And so this would cancel out, right? That 5 and this 5, and so we're left with just the 6x minus 9. So 6x minus 9 equals 3x times 5 is going to be 15x. And now at this point, we're going to get rid of the 6x because, again, we want these to go away and have all my x's on one side of my equation. So we're going to subtract 6x from both sides. We're going to have negative 9 alone on the left-hand side. 15x minus 6x would put me at 9x. And then we have one last step, which is to divide both sides by 9. And we get negative 1 equals x. And that's it for those examples. So again, if you have that giant fraction bar going on, again, to get rid of it, you just have to multiply by whatever it is that you're dividing by. Okay, so we have one last set of examples for this video. We're just going to look at some geometry applications. So we're going to write an equation again that are going to involve grouping symbols. And we're going to find the value of x so that these figures have the same area. So this goes back to also remembering how to find area for these geometric figures. So for a rectangle or a square, you are going to do length times width. So the area here is going to be length times width. The area for a triangle is going to be a half times base times height. All right, so now that we've reminded ourselves of what these formulas are, we can go ahead and start solving this problem. So if they have the same area, again, these are going to equal each other. So the length times the width of the rectangle, that's going to equal the half times base times height of this triangle. So the length and width of our rectangle, we have a 5, and then the width of x plus 4, and that needs to equal this half times the base in this case, which is 12, multiplied by the height, which is the expression 2x minus 6. And now, just like the previous questions, we just need to clean this up a little bit. So on the left-hand side, we know we're going to have to distribute. On the right-hand side, We're also going to have to distribute, but let's multiply this out and simplify that before we do any distributing. So we're going to have 5 in parentheses x plus 4 equals a half of 12 is going to be 6. And then in parentheses, we got this 2x minus 6. And now we're going to use the distributive property. So we're going to do 5 times x, 5 times 4, 6 times the 2x, 6 times the 6 there. And so we have 5x plus 20 equals 12x minus 36. And then at this point, I am going to go and subtract the 5x from both sides. And again, you have 4 choices here. You could subtract 5x, you could subtract 20, you could subtract 12x, you could add 36. Totally up to you. I like to try to get it so that, again, I don't deal with negative coefficients, and I also like to try to get it so that it looks like your typical two-step equation. And to get it to look like a typical two-step equation, you start with one of those variable terms. So I will subtract the 5x from both sides, and I will have 20 equals 7x minus 36. And then I'm going to add 36 to both sides. I am running out of space, so we're going to draw an arrow here to continue my work. So we'll have 56 equals 7x, and our last and final step is to divide both sides by 7, and so we get an answer of 8 equals x, or x equals 8. So in order for these two figures to have the same area, x would have to equal 8. So we're going to apply that same idea to the second problem over here on the right side of the screen. Find the value of x so that the figures have the same area. So in this one, they set it up a little bit differently. One, we actually have labels this time, so we're going to have an answer that's going to have centimeters on it. And it's the same situation where we have these two geometric shapes. In this case, we have two rectangles going on. But it's the same idea. So length times width of the one shape needs to equal the length times the width of the other shape, right? So length times width equals the length times the width. So we're going to have a 10 by x, 10 times x, which is 10x. And then on the other one, we're going to have a 3 plus the x. They just didn't write it out for us like they did on the other shape right here. They wrote it as x plus 4. Here you have to kind of put that together and say, oh yeah, this is 3. We have x here. So together that's 3 plus x. And that's being multiplied by 6. And so like the other question, we are going to be applying the distributive property. So we're going to be, kind of looks backwards, but it's still distributive property. We're going to take that 6 and multiply it to the 3 and 6 multiplied to the x. And so we'll have 10x equals 18 plus 6x. And in this case, we just need to subtract the 6x from both sides. We're going to have 4x equals 18. One more step to go. We're going to divide both sides by 4. We get x equals 9 halves, which means x is going to equal 4.5, or again, you can write it as 4.5, and if we want, we can add that label of centimeters in this case. Okay? And then that's it. So with geometry problems, we just need to keep in mind the formulas on how to find area, or in some situations, they might have it so that it says have the same perimeter, which in that case, perimeter, you add up all the side lengths, set it equal to all the side lengths added together on the other shape, right? So if they tell you that something's equal or the same, you're setting those two quantities equal to each other and then going from there. Hopefully that helps you guys with solving and writing equations with grouping symbols as well as the fraction bars. Make sure you check out part 3 so you can see what happens when we have a no solution or an identity. Thanks for watching.